Okay, so here's the thing nobody tells you about Metaphor ReFantazio before you play it. This isn't a fantasy game about elves and dragons and chosen ones. It's a game about why humans need fantasy in the first place. And that sentence sounds like something a pretentious game reviewer would say. I get it, but stick with me, because by the end of this video, I think you'll agree this is one of the smartest RPGs to come out in years. Not because of what it does with swords and spells, but because of what it does with doubt. Quick context for anyone who hasn't played it, Metaphor ReFantazio comes from Studio Zero, which is basically the Persona 3, 4, and 5 team under director Katsura Ashino, wearing a different name. Same composer, Shoji Meguro. Same character designer, Shigenori Soejima. You are structurally playing an Atlus game. Calendar system, social links, follower bonds, turn-based battles mixed with real-time field combat. If you've played Persona, your hands already know what to do. The story, the king is dead, and instead of a normal succession, the kingdom holds an open tournament where literally anyone, commoner or noble, can become the next ruler just by winning enough public support. You play a nobody from a discriminated against ethnic group, entering that race, while also trying to save your cursed friend, the actual prince, who's been turned into stone. That's the plot on paper, but it's not really what the game's about. So here's the detail that made me sit up. In this world, the monsters you fight in battle aren't demons or beasts. They're humans, twisted into these Bosch painting-looking nightmares by fear and hatred. The game is explicit about this. It's not subtext. A character will straight up tell you that these creatures are what happens when human ugliness calcifies into something physical. And once you know that, every random encounter reads differently. You're not clearing a dungeon of goblins, you're fighting externalized bigotry, externalized despair. It's the same trick Persona used with the metaverse and shadows, turning an internal psychological thing into something you can literally punch. Except now it's scaled up from individual trauma to societal trauma, racism, corruption, class contempt. That's your bestiary. That's not decoration, that's the whole design philosophy of the game in one mechanic. Now let's talk mechanics for a second, because people who dismiss this game as reskinned Persona usually haven't actually engaged with the Archetype system. On paper, yeah, it's a job system. Warrior, mage, thief, knight, all the classics are in there. But Atlus frames every single one of these as, quote, manifestations of heroic ideals from ages past. That's not just flavor text. It ties directly back into the game's argument about what fantasy is for. You're not learning a skill tree. You're inheriting an ideal that some ancestor believed in hard enough that it became a literal weapon. Mechanically, it's dense. Over 40 archetypes, skill inheritance between them, party members who can swap roles entirely outside of battle. It rewards the kind of deep system tinkering that Persona 5 fans are obsessed with, but it's wearing this thematic coat that actually means something instead of being pure min-maxing. Let's actually talk combat, because this is where people sleep on the game the most. On the surface, it's press turn, same system from Shin Megami Tensei. Hit an enemy's weakness, you get extra turns. Get hit on your own weakness, you lose them. Nothing new there. But then, Metaphor adds a real-time layer on top. Before you even enter a formal battle, you're fighting enemies live in the field. You can straight up cut a weaker monster down before the turn-based fight even starts, or get ambushed if you're careless. That blend of Twitch action meets strategy menu sounds like it shouldn't work, but it makes exploration itself feel like a combat decision instead of just walking toward the next cutscene. Then you stack the archetype system on top of that, 40 plus classes, and you can swap party members between them outside of battle, mixing inherited skills across jobs. So a fight that looks simple on turn 1 can completely change shape by turn 3 because you built your team to chain elemental breaks into an all-out attack that just deletes half the enemy formation. It's not reinventing turn-based combat, it's Atlus taking the sharpest version of a system they've been refining since Nocturne and finally giving it a reason to feel fast. Here's the part that actually got the game some attention outside the usual JRPG crowd. Your protagonist belongs to the Elda, a race that's openly discriminated against in this kingdom. Not implied, not a metaphor wrapped in a metaphor. NPCs say slurs about your character to your face. The tournament arc becomes a genuine commentary on populism.
on what happens when a desperate public looks for a strongman answer instead of a real one. And look, some critics push back on this, saying the politics aren't exactly subtle. Rolling Stone's review basically said the ideas aren't unique and could have been handled with more nuance. That's a fair critique, but I'd argue the boldness is the point. We are drowning in fantasy games that build elaborate political systems and then say absolutely nothing about power, prejudice, or who gets to rule. Metaphor picks a lane and drives in it. In 2024, a mainstream JRPG being willing to just say something out loud about oppression and disillusionment, that's rarer than it should be.
Persona fans know the calendar/social link loop already. Spend your limited days building relationships or grinding dungeons. Metaphor takes that same skeleton and turns it into an actual campaign. You're not just managing your homework and friendships anymore, you're managing a political campaign for the throne with a ticking clock in a world falling apart around you. Every day you don't act is a day the kingdom gets worse. That urgency isn't flavor, it's baked into the pacing itself. It's the same system Persona built its whole identity on, except now the stakes are dressed as save the kingdom instead of don't fail your exams. And somehow that reframing makes the mechanic hit different. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend this game is flawless, because that's not a review, that's a commercial. The dungeon design is genuinely one of the weaker parts. Multiple outlets flagged repetitive, uninspired layouts, especially in the back half of the game. Enemy variety thins out late game too. And there is a fair criticism that mechanically, this is Persona's engine wearing a suit of armor. It doesn't reinvent turn-based combat, it refines it. So, if you came here expecting me to say this game changed the genre overnight, it didn't. What it did is prove that Atlus's storytelling formula wasn't just a Persona thing, it's a philosophy thing, and it survives the jump to a brand new IP and a brand new genre. This isn't just internet discourse either. The industry agreed. Metaphor ReFantazio won Best RPG, Best Narrative, and Best Art Direction at the Game Awards 2024. It picked up the DICE Award for RPG of the Year, and almost a full year later, it won the grand prize at the Japan Game Awards 2025, beating out titles that had way more marketing muscle behind them. That's not hype cycle buzz. That's sustained long-tail respect for a brand new IP with zero franchise safety net.
So, is Metaphor ReFantazio just another JRPG? Mechanically, sure, you can squint and see the Persona bones under the fantasy skin, but the reason people are still talking about this game a year later isn't the combat system. It's that Atlus took everything they learned about writing anxiety, isolation, and hope in modern Tokyo, and asked, what if we pointed that same lens at why we tell fantasy stories at all? That question is the actual main character of this game. The tournament's just a plot. If you've played it, drop your favorite archetype in the comments. I'm not the only one who fell in love with a specific job class way too hard. And if you haven't played it yet, honestly, what are you waiting for?